This first part of what I want to share is not my story, but I have a friend who lives in New York, and her father's a rabbi out in Wisconsin. And she went to visit her family out there. And she was in a lot of tension with some of her other family members. And her father had pulled her aside at one point and said to her, I understand that you're having difficulty right now understanding the positions of your other family members. And I understand that you think that you are in the right and they are in the wrong. I understand why you feel that way. But in conflict, sometimes the differences are like East and West, that the distance between East and West sometimes is as wide apart as our arms can spread. And sometimes the distance between East and West is just a matter of us turning around. I love that. It got me thinking about the situation we are in our country, the way we feel so divided, the way we do not even remotely want to understand a side that perhaps looks like they are the opposing side, and we have nothing in common with them. And this is where the story changes to mine. I went out on a date some years ago with this woman from Poland. Her name is Ksenia, and she had been in America for 6 months, but had only been studying English for 2 years. Now, I say only 2 years because English, as you know, is a difficult language to master. Tough language. We borrow from pretty much every other language, but then we just make up our own rules. Right? So you have a word like Laugchter, and we pronounce it laughter. Then you have another word, Daughther, and we pronounce it daughter. Or how about this? SHOES, shoes. GOES, goes. DOES, does. That's a tough language. Many exceptions. Many things just to memorize how they're pronounced. The other thing I feel a little embarrassed to share with you is that I learned about 5 years ago how to spell the word segue. You know, when someone says this is a segue from one point to the next, I didn't know how to spell it. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I never knew how to spell it. I hope you don't laugh at me too much, but I used to spell segue as SEGWAY. Yeah, like the majority of you. But segue is spelled SEGUE. Ah, see? I wish I could see. Some of you are like, really? Oh, yes. But don't feel bad that you didn't know how to spell that, whether you're a kid or adult. I mean, I used to see that word all the time. I still see that word all the time in books and magazines and other writing pieces. And I used to do exactly what most of you probably still do. You see that word, you quickly gloss over it, and you mispronounce it as Sagui. English is a tough language. Now, I share that with you because that's the backdrop of this date that I went on with Ksenia. I had taken her out. I didn't want to go too crazy, too fancy, but I wanted her to have a good time. I wanted to have a good time. So I took her to this restaurant called Houlihans. And that's in New Jersey, maybe Pennsylvania, maybe some other states, but New Jersey had a lot of Houlihan restaurants. It's Americana, Applebee's, Fridays, that type of restaurant. A little bit better though. And so I take her out on this date. I'm nervous as can be. We're in the parking lot. When I park the car, we get out of the car. As we start walking towards the restaurant, mind you, this is a first date. I am anxious. Ksenia looks at me, and in her beautiful eyes, she just goes, "Would you like to hold hands?" But it's more like, "Would you like to hold hands?" And I was like, oh. Now, Internally, I was freaking out. I grew up in a community, a church, religious community where public displays of affection were discouraged. I grew up with a mother where that little framework of thinking was even more enforced. Now, my brother Roy, my sister Michelle, they didn't pay it any mind. My sister Joy, she was much younger, so I never really experienced how she perceived those instructions. But my mom, oh man, my mom hated public displays of affection, to the point that one of my strongest memories that affected me in my dating relationships for a long time was when I was a teenager. I was in church with my mom. We were walking into the sanctuary, and there was this guy who went to the church who was a few years older than me, and he had brought his girlfriend. My mom always loved this guy, Mark. And Mark was in a pew. They were sitting in a pew. His girlfriend was next to him, but she was about 3 feet apart away from him. And as we're entering the sanctuary, my mom stops me and she goes, Mikey, look at Mark over there with his girlfriend. What a beautiful Christian couple. And then she paused and she goes, you can't even tell they are a couple. That's my mom. That's how I grew up, right? So imagine this date. I'm on this date now, and Ksenia is asking me, would you like to hold hands? Well, I'm freaked out internally, but outwardly, I wanted to present calm, cool, and collected. I wanted her to experience what it was like to go out on a date with an American guy. That in of itself sounds funny, because I'm not your typical American guy. I don't present that image of whatever that is. I know that I'm not. But I wanted her to feel comfortable. So, of course, I sucked it up and I was like, okay, baby. And I reached out, I grabbed her hand. And as soon as I grabbed her hand, Ksenia freaked out. Her eyes opened wide, her mouth was a little bit ajar. And then she starts laughing. But it's not your normal laugh. It is that nervous cackle of, I was like, okay, this is a weird date. So we start walking towards a restaurant, holding her hand. We get in the restaurant. The hostess seats us, hands us our menus. And as soon as the menu's in front of me, I burst out laughing. Because on the menu was the name of the restaurant. Do you remember the name of the restaurant? Houlihans. Yeah. You see, when we got out of the car and when I heard Ksenia ask, would you like to hold hands? I realized that I put on my stuff to her conversation. And Ksenia was not asking to hold hands. You know what happened? Ksenia, in her broken English, was just noting the restaurant and going, you like a Houlihans? Yes, I know. Humorous for a first date. Once I realized it, I called myself out on it, and we both started laughing. And it turned out to be a great first date. Awesome. But I think about the conflicts that we have now. A lot of it political. A lot of it just people not understanding, wanting to understand each other, and not expressing their positions or their words in a way that can be understood. And what flares up from there is anger, vitriol, all this stuff that is just muck that gets in the way from us being able to communicate with one another. I do believe what my friend's father said to her is true. That sometimes that distance between East and West is as far as we can spread our arms. And sometimes it's just a matter of us turning around. I hope to turn around just a little bit more.